Hello everybody, my name is Kat and welcome back to my channel where we talk about all things horror. And we have another new horror movie review today. I was finally able to check out Oddity last night. This is a indie horror release directed by Damien McCarthy, who I know directed I think one other horror project. I have not seen that film, although I do want to check out his other work after seeing Oddity. And this has distribution by Shudder, so it will be released on their streaming platform at some point in the next few months. So throughout the last 2 weeks, I had people messaging me, asking me if I was going to go see this film because they saw it and really liked it. And it was kind of one of those films that just came in under the radar. When thinking about the horror films that were going to be released this month, there was a lot of hype around, obviously the bigger releases like the Maxines or the Longlegs. But this was a film that I heard nothing about up until a few days ago, where then it seemed like it was like the only film I was hearing about. So that's fun. It's always nice when there's like these little indie horror films that can kind of come in and surprise everyone. So one of my local theaters finally got it and I was able to check it out for myself. Did I like the film? Yes, I did. I actually had a lot of fun with it. There's a lot of things to admire about this film, which I'll get into in more detail. Do I think it's like the scariest film ever made, the best horror film in years, what other adjectives people want to put in their clickbait titles? No. So I was not personally scared by anything in this film, but here's the thing. This is a film that's very much focusing on more like supernatural stuff, right? You've got a lot of objects that are haunted by ghosts, psychic stuff happening, right? When the main protagonist is psychic. That kind of stuff just doesn't scare me. I've never been one to be completely terrified by the supernatural stuff. I am someone that gets more afraid by things like Michael Myers or the original Strangers, humans, or what we perceive to be as humans that are purposefully going after people with the intent to harm them, right? Like the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre had that as well. So I find those kinds of films more scary. Those are the things that get under my skin, is just people. So the supernatural stuff has never really done it for me. However, if you are someone that does get creeped out by these kinds of subgenres, then I think there's enough here in Oddity that might get you. I mean, there's still definitely a lot of creepy and eerie imagery going on here. There are a few jump scares as well. I'll get to those in a second. But even those got me pretty good. There were a couple of times where I did jump in the theater, and I haven't done that in a very long time. Now, again, I say that, but I don't want people going into it being like, oh yeah, scary film of the year. While it does have its moments, Oddity for the most part is a very quiet film, and it feels very in the realm of the Gothic. For me, there were Edgar Allen Poe vibes throughout this entire film, in the sense that you have this story and the majority of it is taking place within this house, right, within this domestic setting. And you have very strong themes here around family, sisterhood, love, jealousy, selfishness, murder, all the great things that you would expect of a kind of Gothic story. At the heart of it is really about this woman who you find out has a deceased twin sister, and it's really her grief over her sister and trying to figure out what actually happened with her. So there's definitely a mystery to the heart of this film, of kind of what actually did happen to the sister. And I think it's a story about, yes, grief, but also guilt as well, right? And how these kind of negative emotions become personified, right? So you have a handful of characters here that are dealing with these very negative emotions, and the psychology of these emotions, it's impacting these characters so much to the point where these negative emotions are starting to manifest in various ways, right? They're manifesting in these haunted objects. They're manifesting in the spirits of the deceased ones who are coming back and seeking revenge, right? This is why I'm saying that it has very Edgar Allen Poe vibes in that sense. What I loved most about Oddity is that it is a very simple story, right? Even though it's dealing with these very complex emotions, the story itself is very streamlined. I was just saying in another video a couple weeks ago that all I really want from the horror genre is a simple story with really good atmosphere. And I feel like Oddity does have both of those things. As I said, there's a mystery in this film that needs to be solved. And while it is a very straightforward story, what I think it does well is kind of giving these little misdirections here and there. This killing that is setting off all the events in the story. You're kind of wondering okay, was this something that was done by one of the human characters? Is this something that's done by some sort of paranormal demon or entity or ghost, but there's also questions about whether or not anything that you're seeing is even real. And Damien McCarthy is doing this in very like subtle ways as well. When you go to watch this film, one thing that you'll notice is that when you're inside the house location, and most of this film takes place in one location, which is inside this house. It's very like old castle looking type home, which again just adds to the overall gothicness of it all. But one thing that I thought was so interesting was like in the background, like on the walls, there were all of these like, what do you call them? The Rorschach, the like ink blots that you always see in these kinds of movies, right? Where the psychologist is holding up like ink blots and characters are supposed to say like what they see. There were a bunch of those like throughout the background of the film, which had me wondering like, okay, is this gonna like go in the direction of like these characters are just like hallucinating? Is this all some sort of like psychological experiment? Even though I could kind of guess at the beginning where I thought the film might be going and what the answer might be, there were still moments within like the second and third act where I was like, I'm really not sure what the answer is here, but I'm really looking forward to seeing where the film is going to take me. So I thought the narrative here was impressive in that it is telling a very simple story, but it is asking like all of these questions, and it does keep this mystery going and kind of having you as the audience guessing like what is really going on here. And speaking of the house location and just the setting in general, I really loved the way that this film played with the locations of the house, right? In terms of like the upstairs versus the downstairs. So this probably seems like inconsequential, but it is something that you do see in film, especially films that take place within a domestic setting of some kind, and films that are commenting on our kind of, you know, worst impulses, whether that's jealousy or greed or just narcissism. And that's using like the location and the different levels within a location as a means of representing different parts of a character's psyche. Hitchcock did this a lot. For example, if you ever want to fall down like a very nerdy rabbit hole, go look for like videos or articles that talk about the house in Psycho and how the house, not the hotel, but the actual house, how the different levels of that house that Hitchcock takes us through is supposed to represent different layers of the psyche, right? So in some senses, like the upstairs is supposed to be the more like conscious realm where like secrets are hidden. And then you have like the downstairs, the basement, which is supposed to represent the unconscious where the secrets are revealed. You can also use like levels of house to show like power dynamics within characters, right? Like if a character is ascending up the stairs, then they're usually in more of a position of power versus like when they're going downstairs. A really great example of that from recent years to be something like Parasite. Go watch that film and kind of look at where the characters are, where their physical location is, and how that represents where they are within like the power dynamics at any one point of time in the movie. So all of that film theory jargon to say that I think Oddity plays with that as well, in the sense that you have a very similar situation going on here where it's like you have characters that will like go upstairs to like one level, and that's where oftentimes like new information is presented, or characters will like learn something new, right? Some secret will get revealed, versus like when they're downstairs, which is when a lot of the murders happen, or just kind of like the creepy eeriness is at an all-time high, is when we're on that kind of like lower base level. So I liked that. I liked that the director was playing with the location in that sense. To me, that's always a really great sign of intentional filmmaking and intentional directing. And then as part of the locations in the film, you have the actual oddities. When you first meet the main protagonist, right, who again is a twin sister that is psychic, you also find out that she is blind due to a medical condition, and this was a medical condition that also caused her to hallucinate, which is kind of where the questions pop up of like, is any of this really happening? But she runs this antique shop that is full of these like objects. I think the antique shop is called like Oddity something. And I was reading that a lot of the antiques that are in this film are actual antiques that the director went out and found himself from like various shops. So I think that's really cool. And then of course, if you've seen the trailers or any sort of like promotional material for this film, you'll know that like the main oddity is this very like giant wooden statue guy. I had not seen much promotional material for this film before I went to go see it. I just kind of casually like skimmed through the trailer. And so I see this wooden guy like just kind of sitting there and hanging out, and I got a little worried because in a lesser film it would have been really easy to rely on this kind of gimmick, to like rely on this type of creature and really kind of go overboard with having this entity like come alive and do a lot of the killings, right? It would be really easy to just kind of focus all of the attention there. And I'll say it, like this wooden figure, I believe it might be like some sort of like golem like creature. Like if you go and read like folklore about the golem, it's essentially this giant like doll that's created, and then the creator, you know, puts their essence into the doll, basically becomes a servant for the creator, right? Kind of goes out and does like the creator's bidding. So it seemed like that's kind of what this creature was supposed to be. And I will say, like, while it does play a role in the story and while it does become important, I was really happy to see that the film was not relying on this like golem creature that much. But this is a story that's much more concerned with the human characters. It's a film that makes itself very clear at the beginning that it is trying to have a more supernatural bent toward it, but the supernatural aspects are still grounded within these human characters, which I appreciated. Also, speaking of the objects, I was so delighted when we got to the end of the film to see a character bring back an object that had been set up in the first act of the film. And I was like, oh my god, are we actually getting like a real payoff? I feel like I haven't seen one of those in a film in like months. And it was one of those things where like they had set it up in the first act and then I had completely forgotten about it until it was brought up at the very end. And then I was like, oh yeah, I remember that. I don't know what it is. I don't know what it is about bookends at the beginning of a story and the end of the story, but there's something about it that just feels very satisfying, right? It feels like the film is coming full circle, right? Everything that he's like showing within the film has some sort of purpose that's going to come back later in the story. So it was just nice to have a payoff. It was nice to have a satisfying conclusion. So I think for the most part, the story works really well here. Another thing that this film needs to be praised for is the atmosphere that it creates. Now, when I was skimming through the trailer, like I wasn't that impressed by the visuals, but actually seeing it in a theater, it is a very well crafted film. It does create that very like gothic ambiance, right? It has that very like soft lighting. There's scenes where you're outside and it just feels very like moody and foggy. I really liked the way that they played with lighting here as well. So visually, it's very well done. And then the sound design of this film also needs to be praised. This film does such a good job of creating that like immersive environment where you're in this big like house location. And again, it's very quiet and you're just kind of hanging with the characters and they're like walking around and you just hear like creaking of the floorboards. You hear the wind howling outside. The film does have a score that works well, but I liked that there were times where, you know, the kind of music went away and you were just like there in the environment and again, hearing all of these natural sounds. So it has that ambiance to it that I personally really like. You have like scenes where you have characters that, you know, they're looking over these like trinkets, these oddities, and they're doing it in these very like slow, deliberate kind of movements. Some scenes were giving me like very ASMR vibes, if I'm being honest. But I like that. I've said it before in videos, like I'm very much a fan of like quiet horror, where again, it's just creating this atmosphere and kind of bringing you into this location with the characters and you just kind of get to hang out with them for a little bit, and slowly but surely the dread and the anxiety is just starting to build and build and build as characters are slowly learning more and more about the environment that they're in. I love films like Ty West's House of the Devil for that same reason, right? It's a very quiet film for most of it, but then when something does happen, it's like terrifying. I feel like even films like the original Halloween or even the original Friday the 13th, like they also kind of have that like ambiance aspect to it as well. It's like the kind of horror that I find very comforting. I call these movies like my comfort horror movies because I can just kind of throw them on in the background like while I'm doing stuff, or you know, they're the type of films where it's like if I'm just having a lazy Sunday, for example, and I just want to like hang out in bed and like drink my hot cocoa, like these are films that like I'll put on. Cozy horror might be another way you could describe this movie, and again, that is not going to be the vibes for everyone, but for those of you that like that kind of horror, you'll probably really enjoy Oddity. This film really reminded me of a book that I actually read. It was over the 4th of July holiday. Here's an impromptu, if you like this movie, read this book recommendation. But I read this book, What Moves the Dead. It's a short book, very quick to get through. Not my favorite like horror book that I've read this year, but I think it has very much the same vibes that Oddity gives, in the sense that it's a gothic tale. It actually is a retelling of Edgar Allan Poe's The Fall of the House of Usher. It's like Fall of the House of Usher meets like The Last of Us. It's like all in one location. You have characters that are taking their time to try to like figure out what the mystery is that's going on here. It is not too over the top in terms of gore or like really heavy violence. silence. Again, all about like mood and just kind of creating that atmosphere. So I don't know, when I was watching Oddity, like I just kept thinking about this book because very similar vibes. So overall, really enjoyed this film. You know, there are a few things that like I could nitpick here and there about it. You know, like the relationship with the twin sisters in this film. Like you could have maybe established that a little bit more. I maybe would have liked to see a little bit more of that relationship. This is a film that's definitely playing with like time in terms of, you know, you have things that happen in the present, but then it's also showing you scenes of the past. I was thinking maybe it would have been nice to have a scene with the sisters. I mean, you understand like through the dialogue that they're twins, so they have this very just like innate connection between them. But I would have liked to maybe like see that, or at least maybe like see her grief a little bit more. Like for example, there's a scene at the beginning. She listens to a message on the answering machine that her sister had left her before she passed away, right? So you can tell that the message has been on the answering machine for several months now, and she just keeps going back to listen to it to, you know, hear her sister's voice. And as we're hearing the message, I would have liked if the film had maybe shown us the sister, our protagonist, like listening to the message and maybe kind of having that moment of grief, because what they actually show us in that moment I think is just like an establishing shot of the sister like returning to her home. And I was like, okay, that was kind of a throwaway shot, like maybe you could have done something more there. I also thought one of the main antagonists of the film, like maybe the motivation could have been a little bit more fleshed out. You know, they do give you like motivation and it's kind of like, okay, but I maybe would have liked to seen more of that character, like really kind of see the nefariousness of that character, because they're a little bit one note throughout the entire thing. They don't really like change much throughout the film. So I think it would have been fun to kind of see that character get to play with like different emotional states, or, you know, just having to like put on an act in front of people, but then behind closed doors, like they act like a very different way. As I said, they set up with the sister that she is psychic, and so a lot of the things that we're seeing in the past, I believe, are supposed to be like her like manifestations of like what she's seeing, right? So she's able to kind of pick up an object and kind of see how the owner of that object was feeling at any given time. That's often how she sees how like people have passed away, and that is the device that the film uses to take us like back in time. And well, I thought that the scenes in the past, like I think all of those worked well, and I wouldn't say like take them out, but sometimes the transition from like past to present felt a bit jarring. So I was like, maybe those scenes could have been rearranged a little bit more, or made it like more clear that these scenes are meant to be kind of like what the sister is seeing. Again, this is all very like nitpicky stuff. As I said, there is a reliance on jump scares here as well. Jump scares are not my favorite, although I will say I think this film does them like way better than most mainstream horror films do. At least there are actually like creepy and scary things that are happening when the jump scare happens. It's not this throwaway gag that we often see in films, right, where it's like, first of all, there's like huge build up and the film is like prepping you like, okay, a jump scare is coming, get ready, a jump scare is coming, right? And so you're just kind of like sitting in the theater like waiting for a really loud noise to happen, and it's like really annoying. And then when like it does happen, like it's something stupid, like, you know, the stereotypical cat, or it could be another character just like scaring someone else. Whereas here, like when the jump scares happen, they happen quick. I mean, there's some like telegraphing on the film's part that they're going to be coming, but there are other times where it'll just kind of like happen. Those were the scenes that got me. Again, not my favorite kind of technique, but I do think that this film did it a lot better than what we're used to seeing. So yeah, overall, I had a lot of fun with Oddity. I would definitely recommend checking it out. Again, like, I don't think this is like the scariest film ever made. I don't think it's the scariest film that's come out this year. But what it is again, a very simple story that does a really great job of creating atmosphere. And it's a film that is not trying to be anything more than what it is. And that's all I've been asking for. I would say if you're someone that maybe you're not like the biggest fan of the supernatural stuff, or you're just not sure if you would like it based off of like what other people have been saying about it, then maybe wait to see it on streaming. Although I do think it's a really good film to see in the theater. So yeah, maybe check out a matinee showing, or check out like, you know, I know there's like theaters like the AMCs and the Regals will have their like discount days, usually on like a Tuesday or something. So maybe go to one of those to see it if you're kind of still on the fence. There were probably like a handful of people in the theater that we were seeing this in, and you could tell that they were kind of casual like horror fans, because they were definitely like jumping at a lot of stuff in the film. But what was so nice is that after the film was over, people were smiling and they were happy and they were saying how much they enjoyed enjoyed it. And when we were walking out of the theater, we saw like a group that was there as well, just hanging out outside the theater and talking about the movie. And that's not something that I've experienced for a while. For most of the films that I've been seeing this year, like the audience has just been looking bored and miserable, or they get up and leave halfway through. So it was nice to be in like a theater setting where it was like, oh, okay, people are actually enjoying this movie. It should be on Shudder fairly soon. I'm hoping that they release it in time for like the spooky season, because I think this is a really good like October kind of watch. And I feel like that's going to do it for the July horror releases. August is going to be a pretty big month, right? We have the new M. Night Shyamalan movie coming up. We have the Hunter Schafer movie, like Cuckoo, I think it's called. I feel like I've been seeing trailers for like months now. I'm looking forward to seeing that and seeing what that actually is. Alien Romulus, of course. So there's like some big releases like coming up, which I'm really looking forward to. But in the meantime, let me know your thoughts on Oddity. Have you seen it? If you did you hate it? Did you love it? Let me know your thoughts, and I will see you next time. Thank you so much for watching.